After my father died, I discovered that my mother and her new husband sold the vintage guitar my father left me as an inheritance. The same guitar he made me promise would never leave our family, because inside it held a hidden secret. But before I tell you, subscribe to the channel. This simple gesture of yours, clicking subscribe, fuels us to continue searching for and bringing these incredible stories. They say music has the power to heal, but I've learned it can also break your heart in ways you never imagined. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 41 years old, living in Nashville, Tennessee, the heart of American music. For most of my adult life, I've been a music teacher, sharing my passion with kids who dream of making it big. But this story isn't about my students or my career. This story is about betrayal, family, and a 1965 Fender Stratocaster that held secrets worth more than I ever could have dreamed. It's about how the people closest to you can become strangers overnight. It's about discovering that sometimes the dead speak louder than the living. And it's about learning that revenge, when served with the right melody, can be devastatingly beautiful. My father always told me that every guitar has a story to tell. I just never expected mine would be a song of such profound betrayal. Dad passed away 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack, and I still remember the last conversation we had about his beloved Stratocaster. He was sitting in his favorite chair in our family home in Franklin, just outside Nashville, polishing that guitar like he had done every Sunday for as long as I could remember. "Sarah, darling," he said in that warm voice that could make any room feel like home, "this guitar isn't just an instrument, it's our family's heartbeat." His fingers traced the worn edges where decades of playing had left their mark. The sunburst finish had faded in places, and there were tiny scratches that told stories of countless gigs in smoky clubs across the South. "Promise me something," he continued, his eyes growing serious in a way that made my chest tighten. "No matter what happens, no matter who tries to convince you otherwise, never let this guitar leave our family." I laughed then, thinking it was just Dad being sentimental. Of course, Daddy. Where else would it go? The reading of Dad's will was held in a stuffy law office in downtown Nashville, with Mom, myself, and the family attorney, Mr. Henderson, who had known Dad since his struggling musician days. Mom sat beside me, dabbing her eyes with tissues, still wearing the black dress she'd worn to the funeral 2 weeks prior. "To my beloved daughter Sarah," Mr. Henderson read in his measured voice, "I leave my 1965 Fender Stratocaster, along with all its history, memories, and the music yet to be made." The specificity struck me as odd at the time. Dad had been very clear about everything else, but he'd written almost a paragraph about that guitar. "This instrument is to remain with Sarah permanently," the will continued, "as it represents not just my life's work, but our family's musical legacy." Mom reached over and squeezed my hand, whispering, "He loved you so much, honey." I felt the weight of that responsibility settling on my shoulders like a comfortable, familiar melody. Little did I know that within 18 months, that same will would become my weapon in a battle I never saw coming. Mom started dating Robert Kellerman about 8 months after Dad's funeral, and I tried my best to be supportive. She deserved happiness, and grief had aged her in ways that broke my heart to watch. Robert seemed nice enough at first, a divorced businessman in his late 50s who owned a few used car lots around Middle Tennessee. He was attentive to Mom, brought her flowers, and always asked about my music classes when we met for Sunday dinners. "Sarah's the talented one in the family," he'd say with a smile that I now know was practiced. "Takes after her father." But Robert came with baggage. His 35-year-old daughter Jessica, who had never quite figured out how to stand on her own 2 feet. Jessica was attractive in that polished way that money can buy, but there was something restless about her, something hungry in her eyes whenever she looked around our family home. She'd recently moved back in with Robert after her 3rd divorce, and it was clear that money was tight for both of them. Still, I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. Family is family, right? The first red flag should have been when Jessica started asking about Dad's collection during family dinners. "Sarah, your dad must have had some valuable stuff," she'd say casually while picking at Mom's pot roast. "I mean, being a musician and all. Those old guitars are worth a fortune now." Her eyes would dart to the corner of the living room where Dad's Stratocaster sat in its stand, gleaming under the soft lamplight. Robert would quickly change the subject, but I caught him looking at the guitar too, his businessman's mind probably calculating its worth. It's not about the money, I'd tell them firmly. That guitar is part of our family. But Jessica would just smile that empty smile and say, of course, of course. I just think it's amazing what some people will pay for old things. The way she said old things made my skin crawl, like she was appraising items at an estate sale. Mom would always defend them, saying I was being too sensitive, that they were just making conversation. I started visiting less frequently, taking Dad's guitar with me each time I left. But I couldn't take it every time, and Mom's house still felt like Dad's home. I thought it was safe there. The memory that haunts me most happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, about 6 months before everything fell apart. I had stopped by Mom's house to help her with some paperwork, and Dad's guitar was sitting in its usual spot by the window. I picked it up without thinking and started playing Georgia on My Mind, one of Dad's favorite songs to perform. The muscle memory was so strong that for a moment, I could almost feel him sitting beside me, humming along in that deep, gravelly voice. You sound just like him, Mom said softly from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. But then I heard Robert's voice from the kitchen, talking on his phone in hushed tones. No, I can't get the money right now. Listen, there might be another way. I know someone who has some valuable items. The conversation stopped abruptly when he noticed me listening. Just business stuff, he said with that practiced smile, but something cold had settled in my stomach. I stayed longer that night than planned, not wanting to leave the guitar behind. When I finally had to go, I made Mom promise to keep it somewhere safe. Of course, sweetheart, she said, but I noticed Robert watching from the hallway, and his expression wasn't warm anymore. 2 months later, when Mom and Robert announced their engagement, I knew I had to make some difficult decisions about Dad's guitar. The house would officially become theirs, and while I trusted Mom completely, something about Robert and Jessica made me uneasy. Mom, I think I should take Dad's guitar to my apartment, I said during their engagement party at the country club. Just temporarily, until I can get a proper display case and security system set up. It was a lie. My one-bedroom apartment in East Nashville was hardly the place for such a precious instrument, but my instincts were screaming warnings. Mom looked disappointed, and Robert quickly interjected. Sarah, honey, your mom's house has a security system and will take excellent care of it. Besides, he added with what I now recognize as calculated manipulation, your father's guitar belongs in his home, don't you think? The guilt hit exactly as intended, and Jessica nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. It's like a shrine to your dad. So romantic. Against every fiber of my being, I agreed to leave it there, but only after making them promise multiple times that no one would touch it without my permission. We'll guard it with our lives, Robert assured me, clasping my hand in both of his. 3 months later, I would remember those words and want to scream. The call came on a Saturday morning in late September, just as the Tennessee leaves were starting to turn golden. I was grading papers at my kitchen table, sipping coffee from Dad's old mug, the one with "World's Greatest Musician" printed in faded letters. Sarah, honey, Robert's voice sounded unusually cheerful through the phone. I was thinking it's about time that beautiful guitar came home to your place. You've got your apartment all settled now, right? Something about his tone felt off, too eager, too rehearsed. I could swing by and pick it up this afternoon, save you the trip, he continued before I could respond. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter, and I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach. That's actually really thoughtful of you, Robert, I said slowly, my teacher instincts picking up on the same forced enthusiasm I heard from students trying to get out of trouble. Are you sure it's not too much trouble? No trouble at all, he replied quickly. Family helps family, right? The irony of those words would haunt me for months. I spent that afternoon cleaning my apartment and setting up the perfect spot for Dad's guitar by the window where the morning light would hit it just right. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about having the Stratocaster back in my daily life. I could play it whenever I wanted without having to make excuses to visit Mom's house. Around 4 p.m., I got a text from Robert, running a bit late, but I'll have it to you by tonight. Something came up at the lot. No big deal, I thought. Car dealerships probably had weekend emergencies. I ordered Thai food and settled in to watch an old movie, checking my phone every few minutes. By 9 p.m., I was worried. By 10 p.m., I was calling him directly. "Robert, is everything okay? You said you'd be here by now." His voice sounded strained, different. "Sarah, honey, there's been a problem. I need to tell you something, and you're going to want to sit down." The bottom dropped out of my world before he even finished the sentence. You know that feeling when you're in an elevator and it stops too suddenly? That's what my heart did. I had the guitar in my car, all wrapped up safe in its case, just like you'd want. Robert's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine emotion. "I stopped at the grocery store for your mom. She needed a few things for dinner tomorrow. I was only inside for maybe 20 minutes, I swear on my mother's grave." The pause stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When I came out, the passenger window was smashed. Glass everywhere. And Sarah, honey, they took the case. Just the guitar case. Left everything else, my GPS, some cash in the console, even my golf clubs in the trunk. I couldn't breathe. The words hit me like physical blows, each one driving the air from my lungs. "Please tell me you're joking," I whispered, but I already knew from his silence that he wasn't. "I called the police immediately," he continued, his voice breaking. "They said guitar thefts are common around here, especially vintage ones. Sarah, I am so sorry. I know how much that guitar meant to you and your dad." The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. The police report was filed at 7:43 p.m. that night at the West Precinct. Officer Martinez was kind but matter-of-fact as she took Robert's statement. I insisted on driving over to meet them at the scene, a Kroger parking lot in Brentwood that I'd been to 100 times with Mom. The sight of Robert's silver Lexus with its shattered passenger window made everything real in the worst possible way. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry about your loss," Officer Martinez told me gently. "We see this more often than people think. These criminals know what to look for, and vintage instruments are easy to sell." She gestured to the scattered glass on the asphalt. "Your stepfather said this was a 1965 Fender Stratocaster? That's probably worth $15,000 to $20,000 on the street." Robert stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders, his own eyes red-rimmed with what I thought was grief and guilt. "I keep replaying it," he said quietly. "If I had just taken it straight to Sarah's place first." "Don't blame yourself," I heard myself saying, even though part of me wanted to scream at him. How could he have been so careless with something so precious? The next 3 weeks passed in a gray haze of grief that felt almost as sharp as when Dad had died. I found myself checking pawn shops and guitar stores across Nashville, driving aimlessly through parts of the city I'd never explored, hoping to catch a glimpse of that familiar sunburst finish. I posted on every Facebook group for Nashville musicians, offering a reward for any information. The responses were sympathetic but unhelpful. Everyone had a story about stolen instruments, but none about mine. Mom tried to comfort me with casseroles and phone calls, but Robert seemed to be avoiding me entirely. "He's just devastated," Mom explained when I mentioned his absence. "He feels so responsible. I've never seen him beat himself up like this." I started sleeping poorly, waking up from dreams where I could hear Dad's voice calling my name, only to remember that both he and his guitar were gone forever. My students at school noticed my distraction, and my principal gently suggested I take some personal time. I was drowning in a grief I couldn't explain to anyone. How do you tell people you're mourning an object? It was a Thursday morning, exactly 3 weeks and 2 days after the theft, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" the voice asked, older, gravelly, with the slight accent of someone who'd lived in the South his whole life. "This is Frank Delacroix from Delacroix Vintage Instruments on Music Row. I think I might have some information about your father's guitar." My heart hammered so hard I was sure he could hear it through the phone. Someone posted about a stolen 65 Strat on the Nashville Musicians Facebook page. Beautiful sunburst finish, some specific wear patterns on the neck. "Yes." I practically shouted. "Yes, that's Dad's guitar. Do you have it? Did someone try to sell it to you?" Frank's pause lasted just long enough to make me panic. "Ms. Mitchell, I think you need to come down to my shop. And Sarah, you might want to prepare yourself. I think someone's been lying to you." The drive to Music Road took forever and no time at all. I parked crooked and ran to the shop door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the handle. Frank Delacroix was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent 40 years buying and selling vintage instruments, weathered hands, knowing eyes, and the kind of patience that comes from dealing with musicians and their stories all day long. "Sarah," he said gently as I burst through his shop door, "I bought that guitar 3 weeks ago. From a man named Robert Kellerman." The words hit me like ice water. That's my stepfather. But Robert said it was stolen. He filed a police report." Frank's expression grew grim as he led me toward the back of the shop. "Honey, nobody stole that guitar. Your stepfather sold it to me fair and square, said it belonged to him, even had some paperwork that looked official." My legs gave out, and I had to grab the counter to keep from falling. He had paperwork? Bills of sale, some kind of estate document. I mean, I've been doing this for decades, and I can usually spot stolen goods. This felt legitimate. Frank disappeared into the back room and returned carrying a familiar black case that made my heart stop completely. "Sarah, I think your stepfather played me for a fool. And more importantly, I think he's been playing you for one too." As he opened the case and revealed Dad's Stratocaster, gleaming under the shop's fluorescent lights, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family had been a lie. Frank poured me a cup of coffee from the pot he kept behind his counter, his weathered hands steady while mine trembled like leaves in a storm. "Sarah, I need you to understand something," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I've been in this business since 1982, and I've seen every kind of con artist, desperate musician, and family dispute you can imagine. Your stepfather didn't come in here acting nervous or suspicious. He walked in like he owned that guitar." Frank pulled out a manila folder and spread the contents across his workbench. "Look at this." He had a notarized bill of sale claiming ownership, some kind of estate transfer document, even what looked like insurance papers. The documents were convincing, I had to admit, but seeing Robert's signature on papers claiming Dad's guitar made my stomach turn. The man knew details about the guitar that only an owner would know, the small ding on the back from when your dad dropped it in 1987, the fact that he'd had the frets replaced in 2010. Frank's eyes met mine with a mixture of anger and sympathy. "Sarah, this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment theft. This was planned, calculated, and executed by someone who'd been studying that guitar for months." "Frank," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. How much did he sell it for?" The older man's face grew grim, and he glanced away before answering. $15,000, which, for a 65 Strat in that condition, was actually a fair market price. Maybe even generous. The number hit me like a physical blow. $15,000, enough to cover Jessica's gambling debts, enough to keep Robert's failing car lots afloat for another month, enough to destroy my family forever. "But Sarah, here's what troubles me the most," Frank continued, leaning forward intently. He kept asking about the case, wanted to make sure I was buying it as a complete set. Most sellers don't care that much about the case, but Robert insisted it was part of the deal. Something cold settled in my chest as I processed this information. Why would he care so much about an old guitar case? Frank shrugged, but his expression remained troubled. "I don't know, but I've learned to trust my instincts in this business. And my instincts are telling me there's more to this story than just a man stealing his stepdaughter's inheritance. What do you want to do about this?" Frank asked, his tone making it clear he was ready to fight. "I can call the police right now, tell them exactly what happened. I've got all the documentation, and this is clearly fraud." The protective anger in his voice reminded me so much of Dad that tears sprang to my eyes. "Or," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspirative whisper, "we can handle this ourselves first. Give you a chance to confront the bastard before the law gets involved." The thought of facing Robert with this evidence made my pulse race, but something deeper than anger was driving me now. It was the need for truth, for answers, for understanding how someone could look me in the eye and lie with such conviction. "Frank, I want to confront him." But I want you there with me as backup." The old man's face lit up with a fierce grin that reminded me why Dad had always trusted the people in Nashville's music community. "Honey, I thought you'd never ask. I've been wanting to have a conversation with Mr. Kellerman about his business practices." "But first," I said, standing up and reaching for the guitar case, "I want to take Dad's guitar home. I want to hold it again, play it again, remember what I'm fighting for." Carrying Dad's guitar case out of Frank's shop felt like carrying a piece of my soul back from the dead. The weight of it was exactly as I remembered, substantial but not heavy, like holding a sleeping child. I drove home slowly, almost afraid that if I moved too quickly, this would all turn out to be a dream and I'd wake up to find the guitar still missing. Back in my apartment, I set the case down in the living room and just stared at it for several minutes, afraid to open it and discover it wasn't really Dad's guitar after all. When I finally worked up the courage to flip the latches, the familiar smell hit me immediately, that combination of old leather, metal, and something indefinably musical that I'd associated with Dad my entire life. The Stratocaster lay nestled in its red velvet lining exactly as it should, but something felt different. The case seemed heavier than I remembered. Not the guitar itself, but the case. I lifted the instrument carefully and set it aside, running my hands along the interior lining. "That's weird," I murmured to my empty apartment. The bottom of the case felt thicker than it should have, almost like there was something underneath the fabric. My hands shook as I felt along the edges of the case's interior, searching for anything unusual. Near the foot of the case, my fingers found a small section where the velvet lining felt loose, as if it had been carefully reattached. With my heart hammering, I worked my fingernails under the edge of the fabric and slowly peeled it back. Underneath was a thin wooden panel that looked like it had been custom-fitted to the case. "Oh my God," I breathed as I realized what I was looking at. Dad had created a secret compartment in his guitar case, so perfectly camouflaged that even Frank hadn't noticed it during his examination. The wooden panel lifted easily, revealing a space about 2 inches deep that ran the full length of the case. Inside, wrapped in protective plastic, were treasures that made my discovery of the guitar itself pale in comparison. 15 handwritten sheet music compositions in Dad's familiar scrawl, a small digital audio recorder, several USB drives, and a manila envelope with my name written on it in Dad's careful block letters. My hands trembled so badly I could barely lift the envelope. Whatever was inside this hidden compartment, Dad had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure I would be the one to find it. The letter inside the envelope was dated just 6 months before Dad's death, written in his neat handwriting on his personal stationery. "My dearest Sarah," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've discovered my little secret. I hope it also means that you've inherited my Stratocaster, as I've specified in my will." My vision blurred with tears as I continued reading. These 15 songs represent my life's work, not the music I performed for audiences, but the songs I wrote for you, about our family, about love and loss and hope. I never shared them with anyone because they were too personal, too precious to risk having them misunderstood or commercialized. The letter went on to explain that he'd recorded demo versions of each song on the digital devices, along with detailed notes about arrangements and instrumentation. "Sarah, I've also included contracts and legal documents that establish these compositions as entirely my own work, with you as the sole heir to all rights and royalties." My hands were shaking so violently now that I could barely hold the paper. "I know you'll understand the value of these gifts, not just their monetary worth, but their emotional significance. Play these songs, my darling daughter. Let the world hear our family's true story." As I sat on my living room floor surrounded by my father's hidden legacy, the full scope of Robert's betrayal became crystalline clear. He hadn't just stolen a guitar, he had tried to steal my inheritance, my father's life's work, songs that could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in publishing rights and royalties. The USB drives contained not just demo recordings, but professionally recorded versions of songs that sounded like they belonged on the radio. Dad's voice, strong and clear, singing lyrics that mentioned my name, my childhood, my dreams of becoming a music teacher. Sweet Sarah's psalm, daughter of music, the melody she carries, Each title made me cry harder, but they were tears of joy mixed with rage. Robert had come so close to destroying this legacy forever. If Frank hadn't been honest, if he hadn't called me, these songs would have been lost in some stranger's house, never to be heard again. But now I had them, and I had proof of their value, and I had the documentation to prove they belonged to me. As I carefully placed everything back in the secret compartment, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time to pay Robert Kellerman a visit, and this time, I wouldn't be coming as his victim. I'd be coming as his worst nightmare. I spent the entire weekend organizing evidence like I was preparing for war, because that's exactly what this was. On my dining room table, I laid out copies of everything: Frank's purchase receipts, photos of the forged documents Robert had used, printouts of the police report with his lies, and most importantly, pictures of Dad's hidden treasures and the legal papers proving the song's value. I called my attorney, Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in estate fraud and had handled Dad's will originally. "Sarah, this is massive," she said after reviewing everything over the phone. "We're talking about fraud, theft, filing false police reports, and potentially forgery. But more than that, if these songs are as good as you say, we could be looking at a 7-figure estate theft." Her words should have made me feel victorious, but instead, I felt sick. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the systematic destruction of trust, the calculated betrayal of someone who had welcomed Robert into our family with open arms. "I want to confront him first," I told Jennifer. "Before we involve the police officially, I want him to look me in the eye and explain himself." "Sarah, I understand the impulse, but legally, Jennifer, I need this. For my own peace of mind. Will you come with me?" After a long pause, she agreed. Sunday dinner at Mom's house had always been sacred in our family, a tradition that continued even after Dad's death and Robert's arrival. I called Mom on Saturday night, my voice carefully controlled as I asked if I could bring a friend to dinner the next day. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, her voice warm with the kind of maternal love that made what I was about to do even more heartbreaking. "Robert and Jessica will be here too. It'll be nice to have the whole family together." The irony of her words cut like a knife. By tomorrow night, there would be no family left, at least not as she understood it. I met Jennifer and Frank at a coffee shop near Mom's house in Franklin, the three of us huddled over our cups like conspirators planning a revolution. "Remember," Jennifer coached, "let him talk first. Give him rope to hang himself with. The more lies he tells in front of witnesses, the stronger our case becomes." Frank cracked his knuckles with satisfaction. "I've been looking forward to this conversation for a week," he growled. 40 years in business, and I don't like being played for a fool." As we walked up to Mom's front door, I felt like I was approaching the scene of an execution. In a way, I suppose I was. Mom answered the door with flour on her apron and joy on her face, immediately pulling me into one of her warm hugs that smelled like vanilla and home. "Sarah, and you must be Jennifer and Frank," she said, beaming at my companions. "I'm so glad Sarah has such good friends. Come in, come in." The house looked exactly the same as always: family photos on the mantel, the slight scent of lemon furniture polish, Mom's collection of ceramic roosters lined up on the kitchen windowsill. But everything felt different now, tainted by the knowledge of what Robert had done in this very house. "Robert and Jessica are in the living room watching football," Mom called over her shoulder as she led us toward the kitchen. "Robert, honey, Sarah's here with her friends." I heard the TV volume drop and the sound of footsteps on hardwood, and then Robert appeared in the doorway with that practiced smile I'd grown to hate. "Sarah, what a nice surprise," he said, but his eyes flickered nervously to Frank and Jennifer. "I don't think we've met your friends." His voice carried just the slightest edge of suspicion, and I realized that some part of him already knew why we were really there. We made small talk through Mom's pot roast and mashed potatoes, the conversation feeling increasingly surreal as Robert played the perfect stepfather role. He asked Jennifer about her law practice, complimented Frank on his vintage BOLO tie, and even helped Mom clear the dishes like the devoted husband he pretended to be. Jessica, dressed in designer clothes that her father's failing business couldn't possibly afford, chatted about her plans to start a lifestyle blog. "I just need some startup capital," she said, glancing meaningfully at Robert. Daddy's been so supportive of my dreams." The casual way she said it, like she was entitled to money that didn't belong to her, made my jaw clench. Finally, when we were all settled in the living room with coffee and Mom's famous apple pie, I decided it was time. "Robert," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the comfortable family chatter, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." The room fell silent except for the ticking of Dad's old grandfather clock in the corner. "Of course, Sarah," Robert replied, but his knuckles had gone white where he gripped his coffee cup. "What's on your mind?" "I went to see Frank this week," I began, watching Robert's face carefully. "You remember Frank, don't you? The owner of Delacroix Vintage Instruments on Music Row." The color drained from Robert's face so quickly I thought he might faint, but he managed to keep his voice steady. No, I don't think I know anyone by that name," he said, but his eyes darted to Frank with unmistakable recognition. Frank stood up slowly, his weathered face hard as granite. "That's funny, Mr. Kellerman, because we spent about an hour together 3 weeks ago when you sold me a 1965 Fender Stratocaster. Had all kinds of paperwork proving it was yours." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked confused, glancing between Frank and Robert like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Robert," she said uncertainly, "what is he talking about? Sarah's guitar was stolen, remember?" Jessica had gone completely still, her face pale as she began to understand what was happening. "Daddy," she whispered. Robert's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. Finally, Jennifer stood and pulled out a manila folder. "Mr. Kellerman, I'm Jennifer Walsh, Ms. Mitchell's attorney. I think we need to have a very serious conversation about fraud, theft, and filing false police reports." The explosion, when it came, was swift and devastating. Robert tried to bluster his way through denials for about 30 seconds before Frank calmly produced copies of the forged documents and the receipt for $15,000. "You son of a bitch," Mom breathed, her voice breaking as the full scope of the betrayal hit her. "You looked me in the eye and lied about Sarah's father's guitar. You made me comfort you while you cried fake tears about it being stolen." Jessica started crying, but they weren't tears of sympathy, they were tears of panic. "Daddy, you said you had investors for my blog. You said the money came from your business." The facade crumbled completely as Robert realized he was trapped. "The car lots are failing," he admitted quietly, his voice hollow. "I needed money to keep them afloat, to pay Jessica's debts, He gestured helplessly around Mom's comfortable living room. "To maintain all this." "So you stole from my daughter," Mom said, her voice deadly quiet. "You stole from Sarah, and you made me an accessory to it. I was going to buy it back." Robert shouted desperately. "Once the business turned around, I was going to get it back and nobody would have known." But I was already shaking my head, pulling out photos of Dad's hidden treasures. "Robert, you didn't just steal a guitar. You almost stole my father's life's work." When I showed them the pictures of the hidden compartment and explained about the songs, the room erupted in chaos. Mom collapsed into Dad's old chair, sobbing as she realized how close we'd come to losing irreplaceable family treasures. Jessica screamed at Robert, calling him every name in the book as she realized her lifestyle and dreams had been built on stolen money. "Do you have any idea what you almost destroyed?" I asked Robert, my voice shaking with rage. "Those songs are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. They're my father's legacy, his love letters to our family. And you would have sold them to strangers for $15,000. Robert had shrunk into himself, looking older and smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear I didn't know about any hidden compartment." "But you knew the guitar wasn't yours," Jennifer said coldly, already dialing her phone. "And that's all that matters legally." As the sound of sirens grew closer in the distance, Jennifer had called the police while Robert was confessing. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was coming, but it was going to destroy what was left of my family in the process. Mom looked at me across the wreckage of her living room, her eyes red with tears and shame. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I had no idea. I would never." "I know, Mom," I said quietly. But some betrayals can't be undone. Some broken things can't be fixed. 6 months later, I stood in the Davidson County Courthouse watching Robert Kellerman being sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud, theft, and filing false police reports. Jennifer had built an airtight case, and Robert's public defender had advised him to plead guilty rather than face trial. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and no patience for family betrayals, looked down at Robert with obvious disgust. "Mr. Kellerman, you didn't just steal an object. You violated the trust of a grieving family and attempted to destroy irreplaceable cultural heritage." Her words carried the weight of absolute justice. "You will serve 36 months in state prison, pay full restitution plus damages, and you are permanently barred from contact with the victims in this case." Mom sat beside me in the gallery, her hands squeezing mine as we watched the man who had nearly destroyed our family get led away in shackles. She had testified against him with a strength I didn't know she possessed, her voice clear and unwavering as she described his lies and manipulation. "I loved him," she whispered to me as the courtroom emptied, "but I love you more. I'm sorry it took me so long to choose the right side." The true scope of Dad's hidden legacy became clear over the following weeks as music industry experts examined his unreleased songs. What I had discovered in that guitar case wasn't just family memorabilia. It was a treasure trove of professional quality compositions that belonged in the pantheon of American music. "Sarah, these songs are extraordinary," said Marcus Webb, the A&R executive from Sony Music Nashville who had known Dad during his performing days. "Your father was sitting on material that could have made him a household name. The melodies, the lyrics, the arrangements. This is Grammy-level songwriting." The legal team Jennifer assembled worked tirelessly to establish clear ownership of the compositions and secure the publishing rights in my name. When the paperwork was finalized, the numbers took my breath away. The songs were conservatively valued at $1.8 million in immediate licensing deals, with potential lifetime royalties reaching into the tens of millions. Dad had left me more than a guitar. He had left me financial independence and the power to honor his memory on my own terms. But money wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that his music would finally be heard by the world. The album release party for Hidden Melodies, The Lost Songs of James Mitchell, was held at the historic Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, the mother church of country music where Dad had always dreamed of performing. Standing on that sacred stage, holding his 1965 Stratocaster, I felt his presence so strongly that I had to pause and catch my breath before speaking to the packed audience. "My father always told me that music was meant to be shared," I said into the microphone, my voice carrying across the hallowed hall. "These songs were hidden for years, but tonight, they're coming home." The audience, filled with Nashville musicians, music journalists, and people who had known and loved Dad, listened in reverent silence as I played Sweet Sarah Psalm, the composition he had written for my 16th birthday but never shared. There wasn't a dry eye in the house, including my own. 3 songs from the album hit the country music charts within 2 months, and Daughter of Music reached number 4 on the Billboard Country Songs chart. Dad had finally gotten his Ryman debut, just not the way either of us had imagined. With the financial windfall came the opportunity to turn my pain into purpose. I established the James Mitchell Music Education Foundation, using Dad's royalty money to provide instruments, lessons, and scholarships to underprivileged kids across Tennessee. "Music saved my father's life," I explained to the local news reporter who came to cover the foundation's first scholarship ceremony. "It gave him purpose, identity, and a way to connect with people. Every child deserves that same opportunity." The foundation's first major project was renovating the music room at my own school, installing state-of-the-art equipment and creating a recording studio where students could experiment with songwriting and production. Seeing kids hold guitars for the first time, watching their faces light up when they played their first chord, reminded me why I had become a teacher in the first place. Dad's music was creating music in others, rippling outward like stones thrown into still water. It was the kind of legacy he would have wanted, not just songs, but the gift of song itself, passed from one generation to the next like a sacred torch. Jessica's story became one of the unexpected silver linings in this whole nightmare. After Robert's arrest, she had hit rock bottom, finally forced to confront her gambling addiction and financial irresponsibility without her father's enabling. She came to see me 3 months after the trial, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "Sarah, I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she said, sitting in my living room where Dad's guitar now held a place of honor. "But I want you to know that I had no idea what he was doing. I thought the money really came from his business." Her tears seemed genuine, and something in her broken posture reminded me of myself during those dark weeks when I thought the guitar was gone forever. "Jessica, I believe you," I told her. "But you need help, and I'm willing to provide it on one condition: you get clean, and you get serious about building a real life for yourself." I used part of the foundation's resources to pay for her treatment at a residential facility in California. 6 months later, she sent me a photo from her new job as a counselor at a financial literacy nonprofit in San Diego. Sometimes redemption comes from the most unexpected places. Mom and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully, like musicians learning to play together after years apart. The betrayal had wounded us both, but it had also taught us the value of complete honesty and unconditional loyalty. "I should have listened to your instincts about Robert," she admitted during one of our weekly dinners. "You saw through him long before I did." We established new traditions: Sunday afternoons playing Dad's songs together, Mom on her old piano and me on the Stratocaster, filling the house with the music that had always been our family's common language. She moved back into the house she had shared with Dad, reclaiming spaces that Robert had tried to make his own. "This is where I belong," she said simply, "with your father's memory and your future." The divorce proceedings were swift and uncontested. Robert had no grounds to claim anything after his criminal conviction. Mom kept Dad's ring on a chain around her neck, a reminder that true love doesn't die just because someone tries to bury it under lies. We were a family again, just the two of us, but somehow that felt like enough. 2 years later, I sit in my music classroom every day, watching students discover the magic of creating something beautiful from nothing. Dad's Stratocaster hangs on the wall behind my desk, a constant reminder that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The foundation has grown beyond my wildest dreams. We've provided instruments to over 500 children, funded music programs in 12 schools, and created opportunities for young musicians that Dad could never have imagined. But the real victory isn't measured in dollars or recognition or even justice served. The real victory is the knowledge that Dad's music lives on, not just in the recordings that made us money, but in every chord progression taught, every song learned, every young voice that finds its strength through melody. Sometimes I catch myself humming Sweet Sarah's song while I grade papers, and I swear I can hear Dad humming along, his voice harmonizing with mine across the veil between life and memory. Robert Kellerman thought he could steal my father's legacy, but he only succeeded in setting it free. Some treasures are too powerful to be buried, too meaningful to be silenced, and too loved to ever truly be lost. Dad's music and the family it created will echo long after all of us are gone.